Someone has to provide since our sister remains a broke loser. My brother said that at our Sunday backyard barbecue while handing our mother a set of car keys, the whole family clapping around him. I didn't respond. I reached into my bag, pulled out a bank ledger, and laid it flat on the picnic table in front of him. 47 transfers, $3,150 each, 6 years, every payment anonymous. Everyone landing in my parents' mortgage account while my brother stood at every holiday dinner accepting credit he never earned. He looked down. I watched the color leave his face. What nobody at that table knew, not my brother, not my mother, not one single person standing at that grill, was that I had been the one keeping this family's house. When I turned that ledger around, 8 people watched my brother try to find a single word to say. He hasn't called himself the provider since. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to the week I sent that first transfer and the phone call my brother made to our mother that same night, telling her I was too selfish and too broke to ever help anyone. 6 years ago, my father sat at the head of the dining table and didn't touch his pot roast. That was the first sign. In my family, my father's appetite was the barometer for the household. If he was eating, the bills were paid and the world was right. That night, his fork stayed rested against the rim of his plate. The bank sent a letter, he said. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. The yellow envelope was sitting right next to the salt shaker. My brother David was 24 then. He had just launched what he called a tech incubator, which mostly involved him wearing expensive hoodies and asking my parents for bridge loans that never seemed to find the other side of the river. "Look, Dad," David said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I'd cover the whole thing right now, but my capital is locked up in the Series A round. It's a liquidity thing, you understand." My father nodded, even though he didn't understand. He just wanted to believe his son was a titan of industry. My mother reached over and patted David's hand. "We know, honey, you're doing big things. We wouldn't want to distract you from your vision." Then she turned to me. I was 22, working 2 jobs and wearing a coat I'd bought at a thrift store for $6. "Sarah," she said, her voice dropping the warmth it held for David. "You need to pick up more shifts at the diner. Your father is stressed. The least you can do is cover the groceries and the utilities for a while. Try to be useful instead of just taking up space." I looked at the yellow envelope. I knew the numbers. My father had been a foreman for 30 years until his knees gave out, and the pension didn't cover the aggressive mortgage they'd taken out to fund David's private college tuition. They were $18,000 behind. They were 30 days from a foreclosure sign being hammered into the front lawn. I didn't tell them I had just landed a junior analyst role at a top-tier financial firm. I didn't tell them I was making more in my first month than David had made in 3 years. I knew my father. If I handed him a check, it would kill him. He'd feel like a failure, and he'd take that shame out on me in the form of resentment. So I went to see Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance was the senior accountant at my firm. He was 64, wore a bow tie every single day, and smelled like peppermint and old paper. He was the kind of man who noticed the details. "You're working late again, Sarah," he said, walking by my desk. He paused, his eyes falling on the sleeve of my coat where the lining was starting to spill out. "And you're still wearing that rag. I know what we pay you. Where is the money going?" "I need to set up a blind trust," I said, looking him in the eye. "I need to pay a mortgage anonymously. It has to look like it's coming from a private donor or a bank error correction. My father can't know it's me." Mr. Vance pulled a chair over. He didn't give me a motivational speech. He didn't tell me I was a good daughter. He just looked at me with a quiet, sharp precision. $3,150 a month, I told him, Every month, for as long as it takes. That's nearly 60% of your take-home pay, Sarah, he noted. I'll live in a studio near the tracks. I'll take the bus. Just make sure the bank doesn't send any more yellow envelopes to that house. He nodded once. I'll handle the paperwork, but Sarah, people who hide their light usually end up sitting in the dark. He reached into his desk and pulled out a spare coffee he'd bought. He set it on my desk. Drink this, you look like you're fading away. It was the only warmth I had that week. By the next month, the foreclosure was halted. My father told the family at Sunday dinner that a private investor group associated with his old union had stepped in to restructure the debt as a legacy grant. He stood a little taller. He finished his steak. David wiped his mouth with a napkin and smirked. I knew my contacts would come through. I made some calls, Dad. Mentioned your name to a few people in the city. I figured someone would take the hint. My mother beamed. Oh, David, I knew it. You're the only one who actually looks out for this family. I sat at the end of the table, the seat closest to the kitchen, so I could jump up and refill the water pitcher. I said nothing. I thought about my studio apartment where the radiator hissed and the window didn't quite close. I thought about the $3,150 that had left my account 2 days prior. Pass the gravy, Sarah, my mother said, not looking at me. And try not to spill it. That's a nice tablecloth. I passed the gravy. That night as I was leaving, I heard David on the phone with my mother in the hallway. Look, Mom, he said, his voice loud and confident. I'm glad the house is safe. Just don't expect Sarah to help with the property taxes. I saw her car today. The muffler is held on with a coat hanger. She's too selfish to save a dime, and she's too broke to ever be of any real use to you. Just focus on me. I'm the one building the future here. I walked out the front door and didn't say goodbye. I got into my car, the muffler rattling against the pavement, and I drove back to my cold apartment. I pulled out my phone and set the transfer to recurring. I didn't know then that I was signing up for 6 years of being the family's favorite punchline. I didn't sleep well for the next 3 years. Every time my phone buzzed with a low balance alert, or I saw my father's face relax as he looked at a house he thought he still owned, I felt a strange, vibrating tension in my chest. It was the weight of a secret that was slowly becoming the foundation of my entire life. By the time the 4-year mark hit, the family law was carved into stone. David was the provider, and I was the charity case. The first real damage didn't come from a blowout fight. It came during my parents' 40th anniversary dinner. We were at a steakhouse, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and waiters who wear white gloves. I had suggested a local Italian spot, something affordable, but my mother had waved me off. David is choosing the venue, Sarah, she'd said. He's the one picking up the tab. He wants your father to feel like a king for once. I sat across from David. He looked different than he had 4 years ago. He wore a tailored navy blazer and a watch that probably cost more than my first 3 months of mortgage payments. He spent the first 20 minutes of dinner talking about disrupting the logistics space and his offshore development team. My father hung on every word. My mother just watched David with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. When the check came, David didn't just reach for it. He made a production of it. He pulled out a heavy metal credit card and let it clink against the mahogany table. To 40 years, David said, raising his glass. He sighed, a long, dramatic sound. I'll be honest, it's been a heavy year, keeping a roof over this family, making sure the mortgage is handled, the taxes. It's a lot for one man's shoulders, but seeing you two here in a place like this, it makes every late night worth it. My father's eyes got misty. We know, son. We know you're the reason we're still in that house. I don't know where we'd be without you. The air in my lungs felt like broken glass. I looked at the clink of the metal card, then at David's face. He knew. He knew he hadn't sent a dime. He knew the private investor group was a phantom, but he saw the way they looked at him and he wanted it. He wanted the glory without the bill. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we don't actually know who pays the mortgage." The bank letters always said it was an anonymous legacy grant from the Union Associates. The table went silent. The only sound was the muffled clinking of silverware from the other booths. My mother's face shifted. It didn't soften into curiosity, it sharpened into a mask of offense. She didn't look at David, she looked at me. "Sarah," she snapped, "how can you be so small? Your brother works himself to the bone to protect us, and you want to sit there and play semantics because you're embarrassed that you can't contribute. We know it's him. Who else would it be? You." She let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that stays with you. "You can barely keep that rust bucket of yours on the road. You live in a shoebox. Don't you dare try to take this away from him just because you failed to build anything for yourself." "I'm not trying to take anything," I said. "I'm just saying we should be careful about making assumptions. It's not an assumption when the results are sitting right in front of us," my father said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "David provides, you survive. There's a difference, Sarah. Learn to be grateful that your brother has a big enough heart to carry you along with us." David didn't say a word. He just sipped his wine and gave me a look over the rim of his glass. It wasn't a look of guilt. It was a look of victory. He had realized something powerful. As long as he agreed with their delusion, he was untouchable. I didn't eat the rest of my meal. I couldn't. When I got home that night, I sat in my car for a long time. I needed to check my accounts. I needed to see the numbers to remind myself that I wasn't the ghost they thought I was. I opened my phone, but before I could log into my bank, a notification from Facebook popped up. It was a link from David. I clicked it. It was a GoFundMe page. The header was a photo of our childhood home, the one I had spent $151,200 protecting over the last 48 months. The title read, "Help Save MYPARENTS Legacy." The description was even worse. "As many of you know, I have been personally funding my parents' mortgage for the last several years to keep them from foreclosure. I have given everything I have to keep them safe. But now the house needs urgent structural repairs, roofing and foundation work that I simply cannot cover alone after years of carrying the full financial burden of the family. My sister, unfortunately, is unable to help. I am turning to our community to help me keep this roof over their heads. Goal, $50,000. I watched the total raised bar. It was already at $2,400. My brother wasn't just stealing the credit anymore. He was using my silence to fundraise for a burden he never carried. He was monetizing the lie I had built to protect my father's heart. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. I could feel the 48th transfer pending in my banking app. $3,150, due in 3 days. I had been the secret infrastructure of this family for 6 years, but David had just turned that infrastructure into a stage. And he was inviting the whole world to watch him play the hero while he cast me as the parasite. I didn't wait for the GoFundMe to reach its goal. I drove to the house 30 minutes after I saw the post. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and my heart was hammering a rhythm of pure, cold fury against my ribs. I found David in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, eating a peach and scrolling through his phone with a look of immense satisfaction. The house was quiet. My parents were out at a movie, a matinee David had probably encouraged so he could have the war room to himself. I didn't say hello. I walked straight to the counter and held my phone 6 inches from his face. The GoFundMe page was glowing in the dim kitchen light. "Take it down, David," I said. My voice was low, vibrating. "Take it down right now." David didn't flinch. He didn't even stop chewing. He swallowed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked at me like I was a fly he was considering swatting. "The roof is leaking, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Dad shouldn't have to live with a bucket in the hallway. I'm doing what has to be done. If you can't help, the least you can do is stay out of the way of people who can." "The roof isn't leaking," I snapped. "I had a contractor out here 6 months ago while you were in Vegas. I paid for the shingles to be resealed." "There is nothing wrong with the foundation, either. You're lying to our entire extended family to line your pockets." David straightened up then. He dropped the peach pit into the sink and stepped into my space. He was 4 inches taller than me, and he used every bit of it. "And who are you going to tell?" he whispered. The smugness was gone, replaced by a sharp, jagged edge. "Go ahead. Tell them. Tell Dad that his Union Legacy grant is actually a pity check from his broke loser daughter. Tell him you've been watching him like a charity case for 6 years. You know how proud he is, Sarah. You tell him that, and you'll break what's left of that man's spirit. He'll never look at you without feeling like a failure. Is that what you want?" I felt the air leave the room. He had found the one pressure point that mattered. I had spent 6 years and $150,000 to keep my father's dignity intact. "And Mom," David continued, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "She already thinks you're a parasite. If you come out now and say you're the one with the money, she'll just call you a liar. She'll think you're so jealous of my success that you're hallucinating a fortune. Look at you, Sarah. Look at that coat. Look at those shoes. You look like you're one missed paycheck away from the street. Nobody is going to believe you're the benefactor." "I have the bank statements," I said, but even to my own ears it sounded like a plea. "Records can be faked, but reputations are built over years. I'm the golden son. You're the daughter who barely finished state school and works a clerical job. That's the reality they live in." He reached out and tapped the screen of my phone. "In fact, I think it's time you did your part. I've carried this family for long enough. You're going to contribute $5,000 to that GoFundMe. Call it back pay for the years of peace I've bought you. If you don't, I'll tell Mom you've been secretly mocking Dad's financial situation behind his back. I'll make sure you're not just the broke sibling, I'll make sure you're the outcast." He walked past me, bumping my shoulder as he went. "$5 grand, Sarah, by Friday, or I start talking." I stood in that kitchen for 10 minutes after he left. I looked at the floor tiles, the ones I had paid to have regrouted 3 years ago. I looked at the refrigerator, the one I'd replaced anonymously when the compressor died. I felt like a ghost in my own history. I walked out to my car. It was an old sedan, a hand-me-down that I refused to replace because every extra dollar went to the trust. I turned the key, and the engine made a sound like a chest full of loose bolts. It sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried again. Silence. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I had $400 in my personal checking account. The rest of my liquid cash was tied up in the 47th transfer, which had left my account that morning. I was the secret landlord of a suburban home, a successful analyst with a portfolio worth more than my brother's entire incubator, and I was currently stranded in my parents' driveway because I couldn't afford a tow truck. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the family group chat. "David just hit $5,000 on the fund. Huge thanks to Aunt Martha and Uncle Jim. It's hard being the only one holding things together, but for family, it's worth it. Mother, you're a saint, David, a true provider." I threw my phone onto the passenger seat. I didn't cry. I was too tired for tears. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the engine block tick as it cooled, wondering at what point the weight of the secret becomes heavier than the house it's protecting. I walked home. It took me nearly 2 hours because I took the back streets, avoiding the main roads where someone I knew might see me shivering in a threadbare coat that was never meant for a 3-mile hike in a downpour. By the time I reached my apartment building, my shoes were squelching with every step, and my jeans were soaked through to the denim. I didn't have the money for a tow. I didn't have the money for a mechanic. Every spare cent I had was currently sitting in a digital limbo, waiting to land in a mortgage account for a house I wasn't allowed to call home. I stopped at the 24-hour diner on the corner of my street. I couldn't go up to my dark, quiet apartment yet. I needed to see another human being who didn't want anything from me. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. I sat in a vinyl booth in the back, my teeth chattering so hard I had to clench my jaw to make them stop. The waitress, a woman named Bev who had been working there since the building was built, walked over with a pot of coffee. She didn't ask for my order. She just saw my hair plastered to my forehead and the way I was hugging myself. "Honey, you look like you fell into the river," she said. She poured a mug of coffee and pushed it toward me. "Drink, it's on me." "I'm okay, Bev, my car died," I whispered. "Cars are metal and rubber." "They're built to fail," she said, sliding a small plate onto the table. It was a slice of apple pie, warmed up with a small scoop of melting vanilla ice cream. "People, though, were built to last. Eat your pie, Sarah." I took a bite. It was sweet, warm, and tasted like the only honest thing I'd experienced in weeks. I pulled out my phone and opened my bank app. I saw the transfer successful notification. $3,150. I looked at that number, then I looked at the steam rising from my free coffee. In that moment, I realized I wasn't a victim. I was the one holding the walls up. I had kept them safe. I had fulfilled my promise to myself. I didn't need their thanks to know that the house would be there tomorrow morning because of me. I found a strange, quiet peace in that diner booth. I was exhausted, yes. I was broke, yes. But I was the only person in my family who wasn't a fraud. My phone pinged. It was an email from Mr. Vance. Subject, completed records. I opened the attachment. It was the finalized 6-year history of the blind trust. Every date, every dollar, every confirmation code, all bound together in a digital file. And at the bottom, a note: "Sarah, the trust disclosure period has ended. These records are now unsealed and notarized. The truth is ready whenever you are." I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cold window pane. The rain was still coming down, but for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't afraid of the storm. The walk home in the rain had consequences. By Tuesday, my throat felt like I'd swallowed hot coals and my voice was a gravelly whisper. I took 2 days of sick leave, the first I'd taken in years, and spent them in my studio apartment, watching the mold spot in the corner of the ceiling grow. But while I was shivering under a pile of blankets, the lie was warming up. It was traveling through the family fiber, mutating as it went. David hadn't just started a GoFundMe, he'd started a campaign. My cousin Alina called me on Wednesday afternoon. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 months. "Sarah, I saw the post," she said, her voice dropping into that performative pity people use when they think they're talking to a tragedy. "I had no idea things were so bad for you. David said he's been paying your phone bill too. Why didn't you just tell us you were struggling?" "I'm not struggling, Alina, and David has never paid a single bill of mine." There was a long, pointed silence on the other end. "He's such a good person, Sarah. He told us you'd probably be in denial about it. He said your pride is what's keeping you from moving forward. Just, maybe try to be more like him. He's literally sacrificing his own savings to keep your parents off the street while you're out buying designer coffee." I looked at the jar of instant coffee on my counter. It cost $4.99 and lasted me a month. "I have to go, Alina," I said, and hung up before I could hear her sigh. By Saturday, I couldn't hide anymore. It was my Aunt Martha's 60th birthday luncheon. In our family, missing a milestone event was considered a declaration of war. I put on my best blazer, the one that still looked professional if you didn't look too closely at the cuffs, and took the bus to the bistro downtown. When I walked into the private room, the shift in the air was physical. It was like walking into a wall of cold fog. Usually, the room was a cacophony of overlapping voices. Today, it went quiet the moment the door clicked shut behind me. My two cousins, girls I'd grown up with, were standing by the gift table. They looked at me, looked at each other, and then physically turned their backs to me, moving to the other side of the room to adjust a balloon arch that didn't need adjusting. I walked toward the long table where my mother was sitting. She was holding court, surrounded by her sisters. David was at the head of the table, the seat of honor usually reserved for the birthday girl or my father. He was leaning back, swirling a glass of sparkling cider, looking like the king of a very small, very diluted mountain. "Hello, Mom," I said, reaching for a chair. My mother didn't look up from her menu. She adjusted her glasses and spoke to Aunt Martha as if I were a waiter who had arrived too early. "You know, Martha, some people have no shame," she said, her voice carrying across the quieted room. "They show up to eat the food and drink the wine when they haven't contributed a single cent to the family in years. In fact, they've been a drain on the very people who provide it." Aunt Martha looked at me, her eyes hard. She reached out and placed her hand over an empty chair I was moving toward. "Actually, Sarah," Martha said, "this side of the table is for the donors. David organized the entire luncheon. He paid for the deposit, the flowers, everything. We thought it was only right that the people who actually support the family sit together." She gestured toward a small, round table tucked into the corner, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. It didn't have a tablecloth. It had a single water carafe and a stack of paper napkins. "You can sit over there," Martha said. "Let the people who actually contribute eat first." I stood there, my hand still hovering near the upholstered chair. I looked at David. He didn't look away. He raised his glass to me, a tiny, mocking tilt of the head. He wanted me to explode. He wanted me to make a scene so he could point at me and say, "See, she's unstable, she's jealous." I didn't explode. I walked to the corner table. I sat down on the hard wooden chair. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, the smell of grease and the clatter of dishwashing hit me. I watched my family eat prime rib while I was served a side salad. Halfway through the meal, my Uncle Jim got up to use the restroom. He passed my table and paused. Jim had always been the quiet one, the one who worked in the post office for 40 years and never said a word out of turn. He looked around to make sure my mother wasn't watching, then he leaned over and pressed a crumpled $20 bill into my palm. "Get yourself something decent on the way home, kid," he whispered, his eyes full of a pity that felt like a slap. "I know it's hard when you're starting out, but you really should try and be more like your brother. He's got the right idea. Family first." He patted my shoulder and walked away before I could give the money back. I looked at the $20 bill. It was dirty, creased, and smelled like tobacco. I looked at the head of the table, where David was laughing at a joke my father had just told. I realized then that the lie hadn't just spread, it had been accepted as the new truth. They weren't just misinformed, they were invested in my failure. My poverty was the mirror that made David's success look brighter. I reached into my bag and felt the corner of the envelope Mr. Vance had sent me. The notary's seal felt cold against my fingertip. I didn't know yet what David had planned for the barbecue on Sunday, but I knew one thing. I was done sitting by the kitchen doors. I went to work the next morning with Uncle Jim's crumpled $20 bill still in my pocket. It felt like it was burning a hole through my slacks. Every time I reached for my keys, my fingers brushed against that coarse, tobacco-scented paper, and I felt a fresh surge of nausea. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night looking at my reflection in the dark window of my apartment, wondering how much more of my own life I was willing to delete just to keep a lie alive for people who wouldn't even let me sit at their table. I was the first one in the office. I sat at my desk, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and I didn't open a single spreadsheet. I just stared at the blank screen until I heard the familiar, rhythmic tap of a cane in the hallway. Mr. Vance stopped at my cubicle. He didn't say good morning. He looked at my face, then at my hands, which were trembling slightly as I tried to organize a stack of invoices. He reached out and placed his hand over mine, stilling them. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The bus ride here was long today, wasn't it?" I looked up at him, and for the first time in 6 years the mask slipped. I didn't cry, but my voice broke. "They think I'm a parasite, Mr. Vance. My uncle gave me $20 like I was a beggar at my own aunt's birthday. David. He's taking the credit for everything. He's taking the credit and he's using it to make me the villain." Mr. Vance didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He pulled out his chair from the neighboring desk and sat down. "I watched my own sister do this to my mother 30 years ago," he said, looking at the far wall. "She didn't steal money. She stole the narrative." By the time my mother passed, the whole town thought I was the son who never called, while my sister was the martyr. I let her do it because I thought being the bigger person meant being the silent person. He looked back at me, his eyes sharp behind his thick glasses. "It's not. Being the bigger person means being the truthful person. You aren't protecting your father's pride anymore, Sarah. You're subsidizing your brother's theft." He stood up, straighter than I'd seen him in months. "Come into my office. Bring your personal laptop." Inside his office, it smelled like Earl Grey tea and expensive leather. He didn't treat me like a junior analyst. He sat me in the heavy guest chair and handed me a steaming mug of tea he'd just brewed. "Drink, you're running on fumes." For the next 3 hours, we didn't do company work. Mr. Vance used his credentials as a senior notary and his direct line to the bank's compliance department. He didn't just print out a statement, he helped me build a weapon. He pulled the internal logs from the blind trust, records that showed the originating account for every single one of those 47 transfers. My personal checking account. He cross-referenced them with the mortgage account numbers for my parents' home. He stamped every single page with his official seal. Then, he did something I hadn't thought of. He pulled up the public records for the GoFundMe David had started. We sat there and watched as the recent donations scrolled by. "Look at the dates, Sarah," Mr. Vance pointed out. The dates of the largest withdrawals from the GoFundMe matched, almost to the hour, the dates David had posted photos of his new investments and his lifestyle upgrades. But more importantly, the total amount David had raised, nearly $45,000, was almost exactly the price of the luxury SUV he'd been eyeing. Mr. Vance took all of it, the bank logs, the trust unsealing documents, the notarized origin of funds, and the GoFundMe data, and bound them into a thick black leather ledger. It looked like a professional audit. It looked like the end of a lie. "You have the backup now," Mr. Vance said, sliding the heavy book across his desk toward me. "The information is real. The documents are legal, but the power is in when you choose to open it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And Sarah, I checked the trust status. Since you canceled the recurring payment yesterday, the bank will be sending a payment failure notice to the primary address tomorrow morning. The grace period is over." I gripped the edge of the black ledger. It felt heavy, heavier than it should have been. It felt like 6 years of my life bound in leather. "Give them hell, kid," Mr. Vance said, and for the first time he smiled. I walked out of his office not feeling like a victim or a ghost. I felt like a woman with a map. I knew exactly where the collision was going to happen. I didn't go straight home. I drove to a park 3 blocks from my office and sat in the car with the engine off. The black ledger was heavy on my lap, a physical manifestation of 6 years of silence. I opened it to the middle. October 12th. Transfer ID 99,284. Amount $3,150.00. Status completed. I remembered that month. I'd eaten nothing but rice and frozen peas for 3 weeks because my car's alternator had died and the trust payment was non-negotiable. I looked at the notary stamp on the page, red, crisp, and undeniable. The leverage was no longer a theory. It was a bound volume of facts. I pulled up David's GoFundMe on my phone. He had just posted an update an hour ago. Update: we are so close to the goal. I've already secured the contractor for the foundation work. Once we hit $50, the house will be officially safe for the next generation. It's been a long road carrying this alone, but seeing my parents' smiles makes every sacrifice worth it. Family first provider underneath. The comments were a swamp of praise. You're such a blessing, David. Sarah should be ashamed of herself for letting you do this alone. The world needs more sons like you. I felt a cold, calm clarity settle over me. David wasn't just stealing my money's worth, he was stealing the very meaning of my sacrifice. He was using the house I saved as a prop for a fraudulent lifestyle. I logged into my banking portal. My finger hovered over the recurring payments tab. I didn't hesitate. I clicked cancel. Then I clicked confirm. For the first time in 47 months, the $3,150 stayed in my account. The 48th payment, the one due in 48 hours, was dead in the water. I knew exactly what would happen next. The bank's automated system would attempt the pull, fail, and immediately generate a notice of default, because the legacy grant restructuring I had set up was contingent on 0 missed payments. I wasn't just stopping the money, I was pulling the rug. I checked my email one last time. There was a message from a car dealership, the one David had been tagging in his motivation posts on Instagram. It was a generic marketing email, but it confirmed what Mr. Vance and I had suspected. David had a vehicle on hold for a $45,000 cash down payment. He was planning to walk into that barbecue on Sunday, hand our mother the keys to a car bought with stolen charity money, and use the moment to bury me once and for all. He thought he was playing a game of reputation. I was playing a game of math. I put the car in gear and drove home. I didn't feel like a broke loser. I felt like an auditor, and the audit was scheduled for Sunday at 2:00 p.m. It was Sunday morning. The humidity was already thick enough to feel like a wet wool blanket pressing against my skin. I stood in my small kitchen, the linoleum peeling at the corners, and watched the digital clock on the stove. 10:15 a.m. In 3 hours and 45 minutes, the world David had built was going to collide with the one I had paid for. I pulled the black ledger from my bag one last time. I flipped to the very last page, where a single, red-bordered notice was tucked into the sleeve. It was the official bank default warning. Because the 48th transfer hadn't triggered, the legacy grant restructuring had collapsed. The bank was no longer recognizing the debt as subsidized. As of 9:00 a.m., the full unmitigated mortgage balance, nearly $312,000, was back on my parents' doorstep. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was the family group chat. David just pulling into the driveway with the big surprise. 2 p.m. sharp, everyone. Mom, Dad, make sure the patio is clear. This is a life changer. Mother, we're so proud of you, David. I've told everyone at church. A son who knows his duty is a gift from God. Father, the grill is hot, son. See you soon. I didn't reply. I watched the bubbles rise in my coffee. David's false confidence was at an all-time high. I could almost see him, chest puffed out, leaning against the steering wheel of a car he hadn't actually paid for yet, thinking he was the architect of his own legend. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the dress I'd bought 3 days ago. It wasn't thrifted. It was a sharp, charcoal gray sheath dress that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I put it on. I brushed my hair until it was a smooth, dark sheet. I looked in the mirror and didn't see the broke loser they'd spent 6 years mocking. I saw a woman who was about to hand back a burden she was never supposed to carry alone. As I was leaving, my phone chimed with a private text from an unknown number. "This is the sales manager at Westside Luxury. Mr. David Miller said you'd be the one handling the final wire for the SUV today since you manage his family office. Please confirm the $45,000 transfer is initiated by 3 p.m. or we release the vehicle." I stared at the screen. He hadn't just stolen the GoFundMe money. He was planning to use me as the fall girl when the rest of the payment didn't appear. He'd probably tell the dealer there was a clerical error on my end to buy himself more time. I didn't reply to the manager either. I simply blocked the number. I picked up the black ledger, slid it into my oversized tote bag, and grabbed my keys. My car, the one with the rattling muffler, was still dead in my parents' driveway. I called a rideshare. I wasn't going to arrive as the girl with the coat hanger exhaust. I was going to arrive as the auditor. The drive took 20 minutes. Every street felt familiar but different. The oak trees, the cracked sidewalks, the neighbor's barking dog, it all felt like a stage set that was about to be struck. When the car pulled up to the curb of my parents' house, I could hear the music, upbeat, celebratory pop music. I could see the smoke from the grill rising over the fence. There were at least a dozen cars lined up on the street: Aunt Martha, Uncle Jim, the cousins, and people I didn't even recognize. I stepped out of the rideshare. My heels clicked against the pavement, a sharp, precise sound. I walked toward the side gate. I could see David standing by the sliding glass doors, a beer in one hand, gesturing wildly as he spoke to a group of uncles. He looked like he owned the world. He didn't see me yet. I checked my watch. 1:55 p.m. I took a deep breath, felt the weight of the black ledger against my hip, and pushed open the gate. The music was so loud I could feel the bass vibrating in the handle of my bag. It was some generic, high-energy anthem, the kind of song played at stadium reveals. David was standing in the center of the patio, surrounded by a circle of about 40 people. He had a wireless microphone in his hand, hooked up to a portable speaker system. He looked like he was auditioning for a role he'd been rehearsing for a decade. He was wearing a brand-new polo shirt with a small, golden logo on the chest, and his hair was gelled back with clinical precision. "We all know family is about more than just blood," David's voice boomed over the speaker, cutting through the chatter. "It's about who shows up when the world turns its back. It's about who carries the weight when the shoulders of the elders get tired." I stood at the edge of the crowd, near the ice buckets. Nobody noticed me. All eyes were on the golden sun. My mother was standing right next to him, her face shining with a look of adoration that I hadn't seen directed at me since I was a toddler. My father stood a few feet back, his hands in his pockets, looking slightly overwhelmed by the spectacle. 6 years ago, David continued, his voice dropping into a practiced, somber register, this family almost lost its home. We all remember the fear, the yellow envelopes, the silence at dinner. He paused for effect. A few aunts nodded, dabbing at their eyes. "And for 6 years I've kept a secret," David said. "I didn't want the credit, I just wanted my parents to sleep soundly. But today, thanks to the incredible success of my latest venture and the support of everyone who contributed to our family fund, I'm making it permanent. I'm not just paying the mortgage anymore. I'm making sure they never have to worry about a bill again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys with a leather Westside Luxury fob. He held them high, the silver glinting in the afternoon sun. "But first," David shouted, A little thank you to the woman who gave me everything. Mom, come here. My mother stepped forward, her hands over her mouth. The crowd started to cheer. Someone has to provide since our sister remains a broke loser, David said, laughing into the mic. So, Sarah, if you're here, don't worry about the bus ride home. Mom's got a new SUV and maybe she'll let you sit in the back. The laughter was ripple-like, starting near David and spreading through the uncles and cousins. It wasn't a mean-spirited roar, it was worse. It was the casual, dismissive chuckle of people who had been told a lie so many times they considered it a fundamental law of physics. I didn't wait. I didn't yell. I didn't even say a word. I walked straight through the center of the circle. The crowd parted, more out of confusion than respect. I walked up to the long picnic table where the condiments and paper plates were laid out. I reached into my bag, pulled out the black leather ledger and laid it flat on the table, right between the bowl of potato salad and the mustard. The thud it made was heavy, solid. David stopped talking. The microphone hummed with a low, sharp feedback. "What is that, Sarah?" my mother asked, her voice tight with embarrassment. "We're in the middle of a celebration. Put your things away." "It's an audit, Mom," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but without the microphone, it carried across the sudden silence of the patio. I flipped the ledger open to the first section, Trust Initiation, Year 1. "David says he's been paying the mortgage for 6 years, I said, looking at Uncle Jim, who was standing closest to the table. "Jim, you're a man of the law. You recognize a notary seal." Uncle Jim stepped forward, his brow furrowed. He looked at the first page, then he looked at the second. He saw the red stamps. He saw the originating account name, Sarah Miller, Personal Checking. "Sarah, what are you doing?" David snapped, stepping toward the table. He tried to grab the ledger, but I didn't move. I placed my hand firmly on the center of the book. "Don't touch it, David," I said. "Every page in here is notarized. Every single one of the 47 transfers is tied to my social security number, my salary, and my bank. There are no union legacy grants. There is no private investor group. There is only me. $3,150 a month, every month for 56 months. The silence on the patio was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. "She's lying," David yelled, his voice cracking. He looked around at the family, his eyes wild. "She's a financial analyst, remember? She's good with spreadsheets. She forged this. She's jealous of the car." "The car," I said, turning the page to the second section, Fundraising Discrepancies. "Let's talk about the car." I pointed to the printout of the GoFundMe withdrawal history. "Uncle Jim, you donated $1,000, right? For foundation repairs?" Jim nodded slowly, his face going pale. "David withdrew your $1,000 on Tuesday," I said, "and the $500 from Aunt Martha on Wednesday. Total raised $46,000. Total spent on foundation repairs, 0. Total spent as a down payment on a Westside luxury SUV, $46,000. I looked at David. "The sales manager at the dealership texted me an hour ago. He thinks I'm your family office. He's waiting for the final wire, but David, there is no more money. I canceled the trust payment on Friday. The mortgage defaulted this morning. The credit you've been living on just ran out." Uncle Jim reached down and snatched the ledger from the table. He started flipping through it, his eyes scanning the numbers with the speed of a man who had spent 40 years sorting the truth from the junk. "This is real," Jim said, his voice a low growl. He looked up at David, then at the car keys in David's hand. "You used my money to buy a car while your sister was paying your parents' roof. You told me she was a drain on the family." "It's not what it looks like," David screamed. He was sweating now, the gel in his hair beginning to melt and run down his forehead. "I was going to pay it back. Once the incubator launched, I was going to cover everything." "With what?" I asked. "The incubator doesn't exist, David. I looked up the business filings. You dissolved the LLC 3 years ago. You've been living on the GoFundMe and the loans Mom and Dad gave you." David lunged for the ledger again, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "Give me that. You're ruining everything. Do you know what this is going to do to my reputation? I have a brand." He snatched the book from Jim's hands and tried to rip the pages out, but the leather binding was too strong. He ended up stumbling back into the portable speaker, knocking it over with a deafening screech of static. He looked pathetic, a man fighting a book in front of everyone he'd ever lied to. My mother looked from the ledger to the keys in David's hand. She reached out and touched the keys, then pulled her hand back as if they were hot. "Sarah," she whispered, you were the one." I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. The truth was sitting on the picnic table, bound in black leather. "I'm going home now," I said. I picked up my bag. I didn't look at my father, who was staring at the house as if he were seeing it for the first time, not as a home, but as a debt he couldn't pay. "Sarah, wait," my mother called out, but I didn't stop. I walked out the side gate. I didn't call a rideshare this time. I walked to the end of the block, sat on a bus bench, and waited for the 402. As the bus pulled away, I saw Uncle Jim through the fence, pointing a finger in David's face while the rest of the family gathered around the ledger like it was a holy relic. I leaned my head against the bus window. The secret was out. The house was no longer mine to save. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I didn't go back to the house for 3 weeks. I didn't have to. The silence that followed the barbecue was more communicative than any shouting match could have been. My phone, which used to buzz with commands to buy groceries or check in on David, went entirely still. The social contraction was immediate and surgical. Aunt Martha called me on the 4th day, her voice sounding small and brittle. She didn't apologize for the luncheon seating, but she did tell me that she and Uncle Jim had officially filed a police report for fraud against David regarding the GoFundMe. "He told us the bank was coming for the house that afternoon, Sarah," she whispered. "We thought we were saving your mother's life. We had no idea you were the one actually holding the walls up." David lost the SUV within 48 hours. Since the $45,000 down payment was actually stolen funds and the final wire never arrived, the dealership reclaimed the vehicle. My mother told me later, through a mutual cousin, that watching the tow truck pull that shiny black SUV out of the driveway was the moment she finally realized her son wasn't a titan of industry. He was a thief who stole from his own blood to buy a prop. But the real fallout wasn't the car. It was the house. Because I had permanently unsealed the trust and canceled the recurring payments, the family law of the last 6 years was dead. My parents were hit with the reality of a $3,150 monthly payment they couldn't afford. Without my secret subsidies, their lifestyle collapsed. They had to sell the childhood home, the one I had spent over $150,000 to protect. They downsized to a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex. It's quiet there. The furniture is the same, but the rooms are smaller, and the head of the table is tucked against a wall instead of centered under a chandelier. David isn't allowed to visit. Uncle Jim made sure of that. The family collective decided that David's startup was actually a criminal enterprise, and they cut him off entirely. He's currently working at a warehouse, living in a basement apartment, and paying back the GoFundMe donations in monthly installments that leave him with almost nothing. A month ago, I hosted a small dinner in my new home. I finally moved out of the studio by the tracks and bought a modest townhouse with a small garden. Mr. Vance came over, bringing a bottle of expensive Cabernet and a box of chocolates. We sat on my patio, the smell of jasmine and damp earth rising from the flower beds. "You look different, Sarah," he said, tapping his cane against the slate tiles. "You're not fading away anymore." "I have my own light now, Mr. Vance," I said, "and I don't have to hide it to keep anyone else warm." I still see my parents occasionally. It's different now. When I walk into their apartment, my mother doesn't hand me a list of chores. She offers me a seat. My father doesn't look away with shame. He looks at me with a kind of bewildered respect, as if he's still trying to reconcile the broke loser with the woman who owned his house for 6 years. I don't pay their rent. I don't handle their utilities. I realized that by protecting them from the truth, I had robbed them of the chance to be adults. Now, they manage their own lives, and I manage mine. It's smaller and it's quieter, but every square inch of it belongs to me. This morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. I pulled out my phone and opened my bank app. I didn't see a pending transfer for $3,150. I didn't see a low balance alert. I just saw my savings, growing steadily, sitting there like a promise kept to myself. I looked out at my street, at the trees beginning to turn gold, and I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt solid. Would you have kept paying the mortgage anonymously to protect your father's pride? Or would you have exposed the lie the very first time your brother took the credit?